Hello everyone, and today I got to play the Course of Sin chapter. Early access. It's only the early access of Course of Sin. Not the actual Course of Sin. It is the early access of Course of Sin. Yeah, early access. Anyways, some people have been saying that the Judgment is literally a masterpiece, while others are saying that they're kind of obtuse and kind of clunky. Ultimately, although, I feel like the Judgment, which is currently in early access, just making that clear. The Judgment that is currently in early access. Yeah, I said that. And now you've said that. You've said that a lot now. Yeah, I understand. I just want you to know that it's early access. And you know, we don't want people to get the wrong impression by thinking that it's the real final product when we want you to make sure that you understand that it is in fact early access. Yeah, we get it. Early access. It is in early access. This is an early access version. This is not reflective of even the PTB. Heard. Understood. Anyways, the Judgment is... I thought he would say something. The Judgment is... Okay, maybe we can actually talk now. The Judgment, I feel like ultimately is... The Judgment, just to remind you, it is in early access... Oh! Hello everyone, I got access to the Judgment in the Course of Sin chapter. This is the long-awaited Grimoire chapter that we all have been voting on for well over a year now. So, did the early access impress? How did the chapter shape up? Some people are praising it as one of the best original chapters of all time, and others think it completely missed the mark. And like usual, the truth honestly is somewhere in the middle. Let's talk about it. First, I want to address something that kind of just sucks for me, and it's kind of why I'm in a little bit of a dour mood that you can probably tell while making this video, is that specifically with the Judgment, this is another character that unfortunately gives me motion sickness. Previously, that was only 2 characters in the game that did that for me, and that was Nurse and Crossu. Nurse, it's because she blinks and the screen bleeds around her while she's blinking, and then when immediately after she's done blinking, she goes into fatigue and her head like shakes back and forth and the camera flies around. Makes me want to vomit. I literally physically cannot do it. Crossu, it's because she goes from first person to infect and then quickly switches to third person for head mode, and then her movement while in head mode goes into that same kind of like closed field of view bleed effect that Nurse does, and then she goes back to head mode. And if they, you know, at some point get out of their infection, then you gotta switch back to the first person. It's just like, it messes with me. Once again, it makes me want to vomit. The Judgment is an interesting case because for most of today, I was able to avoid it. Because if you've watched the Judgment be played, you'll know that the lethality up close is basically not there unless... keyword unless you do what the devs tell you in that little character guide tutorial thing that they updated with this chapter, which is to turn around while charging your power and then flick around and shoot. The problem is this means that I am constantly spinning my camera around over and over every single time I'm wanting to go for a short-ranged beam of light. If you've ever spun around in circles a lot in real life, you know eventually you get dizzy. And if you're somebody who's more susceptible to motion sickness, that happens far quicker, which I am one of those people. Now, for most people, this will be fine. I'm just someone that since I've been a kid, I just get motion sick. That's just a thing that I've always dealt with. However, this is something that's a fairly common experience for a lot of people. So I'm kind of surprised that behavior, especially lately with their talk of trying to be more accessibility friendly, that they planned a mechanic, because this is it's in the tutorial. They literally tell you to do this, that they planned an entire mechanic around spinning yourself silly, and that's at best disorienting, and then at worst for me, it makes me motion sick while playing the Judgment. I literally wanted to stream longer today than I did, but I ended to stream early because I had a game where I was like testing out, because I was really being encouraged by my chats, like, you know, the Judgment's not that bad. If somebody is close range, just do the 180 thing. And I did a match where I almost only went for those kind of shots. But like after that, I got really, really motion sick, and I found myself wanting to throw up. And I got sick later after I ended stream, but I realized that I had to go get sick because I was like, holy moly, I am really dizzy. I cannot focus on stream. Sorry guys, I gotta go. Overall, I'm saying this just to like put out there ahead of time that I just have physical issues with this character that I cannot help. It's not the first character, or it's the third character technically, but it's also probably not the last. Do I think the devs should have had the foresight that this would be an issue, considering a history of characters like Nurse and Crossu that cause these issues? I've also heard Chucky does the same thing, and occasionally Blight. Yeah, absolutely. They probably should have seen this coming, maybe got out ahead of it, but I wanted to be transparent because I usually try to give moderately fair takes while still making them personal to like what I believe, that, you know, if there is some level of personal bias, even if I'm trying to avoid as much as possible, that like I know going into this that I can't play this character in the future because of the motion sickness thing. So I just wanted to be transparent about that first and foremost up front. I wasn't going to get into this initially, but I kind of changed my mind. I'm always trying to be as like constructive and fair as I can and possible as possible in these videos, because I think that's the thing that moves the health of the game forward in the best way possible. But the fact that I'm always doing that, I feel like I can be a little non-constructive like one time. I don't think it's the biggest deal in the world, and a lot of the time I'm fair and constructive to my detriment all the time. So I just wanted to say, I think it's kind of like astonishing how many, not only community members, but content creators, even ones you know, almost took kind of like a very soft anti-accessibility stance when it came to this whole motion sickness thing. I've been seeing both in public and in private, people kind of just like dismissing it and not really caring that this is another character that kind of encroaches on that motion sickness territory. And I'm not even somebody who's like, you know, remove the up close thing right now. It's bad. It's like, just, you know, I just wish there was more ways to handle survivors being up close as the Judgment. But I was kind of shocked to see that level of like dismissal. I was very disappointed. I was shocked, but I ultimately just disappointed at the end of the day. So that just kind of sucked to see. So I don't know. I guess the TLDR there's don't be like that. Especially the individuals that were like very much forward faces, like, no, accessibility is important, and then like, oh, well, this is an accessibility issue potentially, and they're like, no, it's not. I'm like, oh, okay, buddy, sure. To get back on track though, now with that out of the way, how is the Judgment? Are they the masterpiece that some creators are saying they are, or is this like a super weak, frustrating character that's ultimately not worth playing? Like I said earlier, the truth is a little bit more complex than the either-or statement I just made. The thing is, even with the limited like 6 hours of experience I've had with this character, the Judgment is one of, if not the hardest character introduced to Dead by Daylight. And I'm not fibbing, I'm not exaggerating for entertainment. I mean that with my whole chest. This is one of the most difficult characters ever introduced to the game. Their skill floor is like on the 70th floor of a skyscraper. That's how hard it is. You will not be picking up this character easily or even moderately. It's just not going to happen. I have almost 10k hours in the game of Dead by Daylight, and I was still having tremendous issues learning and understanding the character after 6 hours of early access. The bright side is the skill stealing of this character is also through the roof, meaning that the clip and skill expression potential of this character is also going to be really cool and exciting. However, that barrier to entry is one of the toughest in the game. Now, on the surface, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It kind of is bad in the context that this is our community chapter. This is the Grimoire chapter that we all voted on. So the fact that we went the direction of making the community character very intentionally inaccessible and incredibly difficult to pick up, I feel like it's kind of like a bizarre choice. Wouldn't you not want the character that your entire community crafted together to be a little bit more accessible and user-friendly? Wouldn't you want more people playing the character that they had a direct hand in making? That way people can actually play the character they voted for. It doesn't seem like the design philosophy honestly matches up with this specific chapter. Even if the design philosophy is great and fine in its own right, it just doesn't seem to match the, hey guys, we made this together, now we can all go play our killer. But you kind of can't, because the level of intensity and investment, like this is going to be a character that like, even like I said, like I have almost 10k hours in the game, and I had a hard time even figuring out what this character is supposed to even be doing a lot of the time. I shared a Swift with some of like the like super big creators like One Pump Willie, Little Space Rock. To be fair, Willie took to it pretty well because Willie is used to playing characters like Henry Creel, for example. But like I was in there with other people who had thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of hours, and they were getting like consistently 4-outed, sometimes with only one hook and one sacrifice the entire game. People who have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of hours are having that experience even after 6 hours on the character. What does that mean for Tube Tat Timmy, who just only has like 2 hours to play every single day. What does that mean for him? Does he just not get to enjoy the Judgment, even though he spent time over the last year or more voting for things to play as the Judgment? That just doesn't seem like that goes together, realistically. Now, my question, this has been proposed, is like, is it truly all skill issue? And if you put in the time, the character's perfectly fine? Well, also not really, I don't think. The character feels really clunky and just kind of like odd, I guess would be the best way to put it. The previously mentioned turn around, do a 180, and then shoot mechanic is intended. Like I said, it's something that's literally in the character tutorial of the Judgment's power. And this is to solve the fact that the Judgment doesn't really have basically any lethality up close. Because if you don't know this, the little beam that spawns, it doesn't injure right away. It has to like ramp up and then gain its damaging hitbox. So you have to start the startup of the animation behind you. That way, by the time it flies through you and at the survivor close to you, it's already activated the ouchie part of the power, to put it very crudely. And I want to mention this while I do like the tutorials, and we'll get to there later. The info that's like, hey, you should put this behind you and shoot it ahead of you is also in the tiny subtext. So most people will probably miss that realistically. Just throwing that out there. I don't think everybody will see that. However, my point with bringing this up is that it is extremely disorienting to be constantly turning backwards and then forwards and then backwards and then forwards and backwards and forwards just to have like your short range lethality. I'm honestly stunned that this was an intentional design decision, that we really went like spinning around and freaking out with your camera. That's like, oh yeah, that feels good and that's good and that's awesome. I don't know how we got there, because who would organically come to this conclusion if they didn't listen to content creators or look in the tutorial and see the tiny small subtext? Who would organically, just hopping on to play even like casually or moderately, go, I should just like spin around a bunch to try and get this power to work. I should turn around, not facing the survivor, and then spin around. And that's a logical conclusion I could come to. I don't think so. And some of you may say that's like, well, that's part of the skill curve, but like without utilizing this strategy, if you don't learn this at all, you're 110. So like that is basically your only route to deal with survivors up close. And once again, I've been hearing from people that even people that love this character, that good players are blowing up Judgments already, because even with this 180 flick trick that you can do, good players see it coming and they are able to dodge it. So it just feels like this character has a major gap in their close range pressure, and the one option they have is very obtuse and weird. So I just not really a fan. And honestly, there's just kind of like little hints of obtuseness to this character, like in general, where things are just very rarely explained or implied, and you're just kind of like left to put together the pieces. The visual feedback on the character also is just kind of like not really there a lot. Like imagine you hop on the Judgment right away and you have your M2 and you go brrr, and then you shoot your M2 and you hit the power dead on, but the power doesn't react in a way that tells you, oops, the hitbox isn't there yet. You gotta wait. There's nothing really telling you that. So like somebody hopping on to try and learn the character is going to be left wondering, did I miss? Was that lag? What happened there? I think this is a change that was done as a reaction, because we heard in one of the previous test builds that they did of the Judgment with the consultants, I believe, where there was a version of the beam of light that was it was a normal projectile. It just damaged. And apparently it was too strong. Like they would just drop the beam of light directly on the survivor. There was basically zero time to react. So I'm assuming this is their fix, is like, okay, the power works basically the same, but it doesn't damage right away. So there's time to react. But as a result, it's kind of like created this situation where the character feels very odd and at worst clunky, because without any sort of like visual effects to like very clearly show the initial part of the beam is harmless, it just kind of like comes off as kind of odd and weird and confusing. And as I can't imagine if like I was feeling that way as a nearly 10k hour player, I can't imagine somebody just picking up and trying to use the power would feel. It's also worth mentioning that as well, this character is really hard to control, and it's really demanding mechanically on you to control. Even on mouse and keyboard with good DPI, I had a hard time controlling this character, so I can't really imagine how much of a nightmare this character is going to be on controller. Those close range, like 180s especially, I'm pretty concerned about, because they seem like they're going to be like nearly impossible to do on analog sticks, which I've said before. It's, you know, you kind of can't skip that. That's very vital to your close range pressure. So if you play on controller, you might be SOL for this character. I'm not exaggerating. I think the main thing, if I'm just going to go straight to like things I wish the character did better, I think this character like needs some sort of stability. A perfect example of this is Artist, who is a character who's very much in the same wheelhouse, the same archetype as the Judgment. High skill floor, high skill ceiling character. Probably going to end up with a very, very low play rate because of that, unfortunately. But it's, you know, it's one of those characters that is very beloved by the very small amount of people that play them, but that's for good reason. Artist has so much potential in skill expressed in her mid to long range shots with her crows, but up close, she kind of struggles. That's why the birds, when they are placed, have a short range at which they do damage, commonly known as melee birds by the community. This gives Artist something solid and simple for if survivors just kind of have her number when it comes to more complicated shots, that she can lock down a survivor, force them into more of a lose-lose situation, and then do the long range, more skill expressive shots as they can. That way they don't lose out on the game or lose out on pressure just because the survivor has their number. The Judgment kind of doesn't really have anything like that. If you can't do the 180 flick stuff like close range, you're kind of SOL. If you have survivors that know how to dodge the beam, or worse, just like to move randomly, because that shuts down this power a lot too. If you can't predict their movement, so shots are just impossible, you also really don't have any sort of fallback to go on, something stable, something consistent that is not as powerful as your skill expression move, but like you don't have anything like lower skill solid foundation to use, period. Which is like something that you see on a lot of characters like Artists that have at least something to handle situations like this. Truly, our games today that we played across many different DBD content creators, like I said, with thousands and thousands of hours, One Pop Willie was kind of the only person who really got it. And like I said, Willie is a Henry Krill like player, that they're really good at the character, so they're good at another character in the same wheelhouse. But the rest of us struggled so hard. Like one hook, one sacrifice was often the result for content creators that like play this game for a living with thousands and thousands and thousands of hours. You know, now that I'm thinking about it, another character that's really a good example of this is Unknown, because Unknown has really, really skill expressive, awesome shots, but also stable shots to fall back on if players are playing well or you're still learning. There's a difference between, say, being Unknown on Muich and going for a UVX shot through the floor on somebody who's already weakened to go for like the super cool clip, versus going, okay, well, they know I want to go for that. I'm just going to follow them up the stairs and then shoot the UVX like right at their legs. That way it insta-pops, it downs them, and then I can go for the fancier shot on someone else. The Judgment having nothing stable like this means that not only is learning them like extremely brutal, but good players make you feel even weaker than you are. I don't know what they could really introduce to mitigate this, but it's definitely a corner of their kit that feels missing compared to other similar characters that already have that base covered. And that's not to say, realistically, that this character is bad, because the Judgment excels at mid to long range snipes. They're exceptionally good at pressuring generators, unhooks, heals, and even hex totems without even having to be anywhere near them, since the beam can travel through walls and objects. Where I saw most games snowball from manageable to full losses when in moments like this, where the Judgment was sitting in like a 3 to 4 gen area and just making sure nobody could do anything in peace. This is where the character really shines, so when this character opens up to everybody on the PTB next month, I'd honestly advise trying to play more in the mid to long range, and that's probably where you'll see the most success. Additionally, exiling survivors is very cool since it applies a hook state, counters blinds, and denies unhooked perks just like Pyramid's cages do. But it also comes with other benefits that aren't just those. You enter a buff mode called Zealous, which makes you more powerful with your power. The survivors additionally get a small monster shrine effect as they are hit by beams within the exiled realm. Heretic survivors have a lot of effects, including Old Ruin, the old Ruin effect, where you must hit great skill checks on gens or else the gens regress, or the heretic survivors cannot leave through the exit gates if the judgment is nearby. It does quite a lot. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I saw a lot of people with worries that the making people heretics and exiling them, by the way, making somebody a heretic, I didn't describe that, is when they have the sin ring around them that you have applied. They get called a heretic from that point. Sorry if I didn't explicitly say that. Anyways, I was saying that I saw a lot of worries that making survivors heretics and exiling people was useless and they didn't see the point, but I can confirm that's absolutely not the case because of the things we just listed. Close this section on the Judgment because we've been ranting about them for a while. I think that they are one of the hardest killers in the game right now, and not even necessarily fully in a positive way, unfortunately. I think a lot of clunk and obtuse design decisions were made that kind of stray on the edge of making the character complicated just for the sake of making them complicated without really thinking if it adds or fulfills a satisfying character design outside of just it hard, so ergo it good. If you're running a full Aura build and going for snipes, this character feels like $1 million. If you're not, and you don't main them, and you're not willing to devote hundreds of hours to them, it's probably not going to feel that way. I think the kit ultimately is kind of overloaded in a complexity sense and could be streamlined from both a quality of life perspective and a power design perspective. Moving on from that, how does it feel to face the Judgment on the other side? I would say it's honestly pretty fun, namely the Exiled Realm. When you get sent to the Exiled Realm, you have what is essentially a flashlight in the form of an artifact, and you go around blinding these quote-unquote lost souls. They're like little faces hanging in this realm to free them. Freeing them gives you a little buffs upon exiting. Dodging the pillars in this is pretty fun too. It's a pretty novel idea to take the hook state that we usually spend just kind of like sitting around doing nothing and make it a little mini game. So you're not just sitting there bored on hook. I think it's a really, really good idea, and it's probably going to be what people favor about going against the Judgment, is that you get to do things while you're on hook. It's pretty cool. As for the bad manners punishments that I knew a lot of Survivor players were worried about, they're really not that bad and honestly pretty avoidable. Teabagging 3 times makes you a heretic, which is the most aggressive one, but if you don't bag, it's not going to happen. But don't get it twisted. You can totally still BM though. You can emote 3 times without being punished. And most people, when they do the stupid little wave thing, when you make a minor mistake, like they only wave like once or twice. That's not even considering the nopers that you can do with your head and with your legs. The waiting in the exit gate thing that is also added is a whopping 45 seconds before it kicks in. That's an incredibly long time. And that basically, unless you are literally somebody who's going to do the watch me leave and you're like the last 1 or 2 survivors, you're basically never going to see this. So if you're not just like a habitual jerk in the game, none of this is going to affect you. And if you're really, really good and you have years of experience under your belt being a jerk, you can probably find ways around this. Overall, the only times that I felt like the Judgment was like quote-unquote unfair to face was a couple times when the beam like sticks up above an object. You can't quite see it because the stuff in the way, even though you're supposed to be able to see it through objects, and you only have like 0.5 seconds to react. So if like, you know what I'm talking about, like if the game considers it obscured, you're still able to see it, but sometimes the game considers things in your line of sight even though they're like incredibly difficult to see. And I've definitely had a couple situations like that today where it's like, oh well, no, it's in your line of sight, but it wasn't really, and then I didn't notice until I was already hit. Combination of that and ping can make dodging the beam of light extremely difficult, if not impossible. But otherwise, fun experience. I will say before I move on to the perks that once again, our team, you've killed it. 20 out of 10, no notes. You nailed the vibes of the chapter. The Judgment as well has one of the best prestige cosmetics I've seen literally in years. Most of the prestige is kind of like, well, there's some blood here and there, and there's some like Twizzlers red vines on the weapon. That's okay, I guess. But they drenched the Judgment for their prestige, which is super cool. It kind of looks like something Pyramid Head would have. Aurora is also extremely excellently translated from concept to game with excellent voice acting lines from her actress. The sound design from the sound effects, the music, just all of it, you guys frankly knocked it out of the park. So yeah, the artistic elements of this chapter, absolute dub. Now we get to the perks. We're going to start with the killer perks, which are largely just They're just okay. Hex Under Your Thumb is a perk that after hooking a survivor for the first time, a dull totem ignites. After that, whenever a survivor gains haste within 13 meters of you, you are alerted and they can no longer gain any more than 15% haste at a time. If you hate exhaustion perks, this is the perk for you. The cool thing about this is that it doesn't function off of the exhaustion mechanics. If somebody's running Vigil, who cares? Vigil schmidgel. It's just a hard nerf, which is pretty niche, but pretty neat. Celestial Witness is every 30 seconds you see the aura of the obsession for 3 seconds if they are over 40 meters away from you. If not, then the furthest survivor swaps to the obsession. This is a big W for Obsession Roulette gamers, but more importantly, you can run this with the only teachable Nemesis for quite an evil combo. Nemesis is whenever a survivor becomes the obsession, they are oblivious for 60 seconds, and then you see their aura for 8 seconds. This is going to be the new snipe combo for clips for characters now. Every 30 seconds you get the opportunity to just snipe somebody or sneak up on them, which is pretty consistent in terms of value. I would not advise running this perk solo though, and if you run it solo, frankly, I'm questioning why you didn't just run Deerstalker instead. Finally, we have Lay Waste. Not Lay to Waste, just Lay Waste, which makes it sound almost like the chip brand. Lay's waste flavor. Lay Waste is whenever you damage a generator, for each charge it has, it regresses 2% more and then goes down a 45-second cooldown. This perk is proportional damage, meaning that you got to use it on gens that have a lot of progress or it's going to basically do nothing. If you're already running kick perks, hitting a nearly complete gen with like say Pop and Lay Waste would completely demolish a generator that survivors had almost done, which will feel pretty good. However, similarly to the last one with Celestial Witness, this perk honestly can't really stand on its own, I don't feel. I even had a gen hit by Lay Waste in one of my games today that was like 95%, so I just kind of like waited for the person to leave, and then within 15 seconds the gen was just done anyways. I definitely wouldn't run this perk alone. As for the survivor perks, they are unfortunately predictably way better than the killer perks, but I don't think it's as egregious as people are making it out to be. But let's go ahead and talk about that. Fruits of your labor is whenever a generator is completed, you earn a token whenever you finish a generator personally, which means you got to pop it. For each token you have, you gain 15%, holy moly. You gain 5% haste. 50 would be crazy. You gain 5% haste for 2 seconds, and then you gain 20% healing progress. This seems like a kind of like a weird survivor fire up, so to speak, giving you a boost that increases in strength as the game goes on, but only when you directly contribute to the main objective. I honestly don't mind this one, and it even bailed me out of some situations in some games today that were pretty dicey, so I like it. Salvation's Cry is whenever the killer starts chasing you, you see the aura of other survivors for 3 seconds, and survivors not being chased see yours and the killer's aura for 5 seconds. This is along the lines of the 11 teachable We See You, where most of the value comes from what you give to your team in terms of information and not to yourself. However, in a landscape where solo queue is still the weakest form of play in the game, and honestly absolutely miserable a lot of the time, I think giving those bad randoms at least a little bit of info so they could hopefully make some better decisions. Let's be honest, they probably won't, but it may influence them to make some better decisions, so I think that's good perk design. Finally, the most controversial one, this one being Boon Steadfast. This is Gen Boon that was very, very scary in the voting for the Grimoire chapter, but I'm happy to report that they didn't go through with the voted in version of this perk, which was Boon PNP on generators, meaning that gens within the Boon would just have BNPs applied to them, which was really gross and completely unfair. Now there's a whole ethical conversation we can have about, hey, we voted for that and you just kind of changed it and didn't consult us at all. It's kind of weird. However, moving on, the perk errs on the side of unfair, still in some ways, despite the fact that I prefer this version of the perk far more than the concept perk that we voted on. The perk is now essentially placeable deja vu, allowing us to have 10% on generators within the radius, and then the same generators regress 15% slower when they are regressing. This one, like the previous perk, is excellent for solo queue because completely winnable games are often thrown because your random teammates decide that they're going to do all the gens on one side of the map and 3-gen yourselves. This does away with that, and if you plop the boon down in the middle of a 3-gen, your randoms know what boons are. If they go to the boon and they see gen, they're probably going to hop on the gen, and if you put that boon in the middle of a 3-gen, you can kind of trick your randoms into breaking 3-gens and playing moderately okay, which is really funny and really nice. However, the flip side of this is that 10% is a lot. Keep in mind, Deja Vu is only 6%. And this is 10, which is wild. And if boons had honestly more built-in counterplay, it'd be fine. But in the big 2026, they really still don't, which was fine when most of them were middling strength-wise, but this one's actually pretty good. So I don't think we can keep, riding on the counterplay we have now, which is just snuffing it over and over and over and over and over. I don't think that's a fair solution. Realistically, you could find it snuff it, and then the survivor that placed it is just kind of waiting in a corner nearby, ratting really hard on the moment you leave because you're trying to be time efficient. They just go put it right back up, so it's like you didn't snuff it at all. It kind of just realistically exposes how dated the boon mechanic is on both sides, and how some base kit gameplay updates need to be made, because so far the fix for boons has just been to nerf them to the point where they're just kind of like mid or all right at best. That way they're, you know, the snuffing isn't a problem, because even if it stays up, it's not super game changing. This perk is game changing. So it's probably time that we go and update the mechanic overall instead of ignoring the growing issues. Also, we got to see the perks that actually will be changing out of the Chorus of Sin update. So let's go ahead and take a look at how those turned out. Save the best for last was probably the simplest change. They just upped the percentile from 4% to 5%. Like I said in the previous video, Stabiffle is kind of like a hard perk to balance properly, because if you make it too good, it becomes one of the best perks in the game and it's super broken. But if you undertune it, it's just like useless and not worth running. So I'm not sure what they could have done to move the mark much with this. I don't think just adding 1% really does that, though. I think it's kind of still in the same spot it was before, but I guess we take those, I guess. We got more details about the Survivor perk changes as well that weren't listed in the dev stream, with Technician reducing the sound range of gen noises by 60 meters when it used to be 8, and had the penalty improved from 3% to 2%. Still mostly going to be relegated to newer players, but at least it's a little bit better. Moment of Glory and Apocalyptic Ingenuity had their chest requirements to activate their perks lowered down to 1, which makes sense because the amount of pressure that both those perks put out was not nearly enough to require two chests being searched in a match. That just kind of like didn't make sense. That was way too strict for too little of an effect. So but the biggest W to come out of these for the Survivor perks is that behavior hurt us out when it came to extending Repressed Alliance's duration, and how that actually be a nerf, because that would mean the Survivor gets to stay off the gen longer, which is not good for them. Now it blocks the gen technically for even less time, bringing it down to 15 seconds from 30. The reason this is good because that makes it perfect for blocking a gen just for a pain res right before that person hits the Scourge hook, or a killer coming over to apply pop. That way it specifically only blocks that perk, and then by the time that killer realizes, oh, this is blocked, I can't do anything about it, and they leave, you can just get right back on. So this actually is a buff for Repressed Alliance, which is neat. Final positive thing here, I did take a peek and check out the built-in tutorials for each character, and for the handful of characters that I play, they seem generally pretty all right. They did this cool thing where they had the bare basics on each slide, but little subtext that had more advanced hints, like we talked about with the one with the Judgment. For example, one slide for Xenomorph talked about having control stations and flame turrets, what they are, how to use them, but the subtext for that slide was like, put two close together. It's really good, which is, you know, that is correct. One of my fears going in would be that behavior would accidentally like give bad advice on how to face certain characters, and then those would just be in the tutorial and teaching players wrong, and we'd have to like undo that as a community. But at least for the killers that I played, that I checked out, the advice seemed pretty solid, so it was a pretty welcome addition to see. Overall, this has been a very long video, so let's go ahead and wrap up our thoughts on the early access of Chorus of Sin. If I had to give it a rating, 1 being absolute waste of time, stupid, worst chapter ever, and 10 being an absolute masterpiece, since that's just kind of like the buzzword people are throwing around with the Judgment. It's a rough one because there are good parts that are really good, and there are bad parts that are really not good. I think, honestly, this is going to be controversial. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. It's a true mixed bag for me. The art direction, in-game tutorials were honestly fantastic, and the Judgment is fairly fun to play against. However, the Judgment is just kind of like, for me, in this really odd zone, as I can't really play them a lot due to motion sickness. And even before I started doing the 180 tactic that showed me that they make me motion sick, they still felt kind of clunky and obtuse, and like they were honestly missing something in their kit. I do appreciate how skill-intensive the character is, but like I said earlier, I question if that was the right move for a character that was supposed to be our killer, since we voted for every aspect of the chapter itself. I will also be forward and admit here that realistically, characters like artists like Henry Creel, not really my favorites. Kind of characters I don't really gravitate towards. Even people who adore the character and are gassing them up on social media are admitting that good players are already seemingly starting to blow them up, which makes me kind of nervous. So realistically, I don't know, it just may be a situation where, personally, for me, it's just not part of my taste. It's just not made for me. I am not the target audience, and it could be just a situation like that. But then again, that circles back around to like, I don't know. I'm not the only person that feels this way. I have a lot of people already backed that up too. And this was supposed to be the Grimoire chapter. This was supposed to be the community made chapter, which would realistically be made more to bring a lot of people in to play the thing that they made, not create something hyper niche that only some people have access to. That doesn't match up with like the community chapter, you know? Regardless, the chapter just kind of ended up being middle of the road for me. Some bad, some good, and some just not for me. But what did you think of the early access of Chorus of Sin? Did you get that neat little code that you got from Twitch Drops today and started playing? Let me know down in the comments below. Beyond that, thank you so much for watching and spending time with me today with this video. And I'll see you in the next one. If I don't see you there, I'll see you when I see you. Goodbye.